It was nearing 6 o'clock in the evening, and the day had been a roller coaster of emotions. Work had gone smoothly, but life? That was a different story entirely. My mind was swimming with questions about the choices I'd made, about the path I was on, about everything, really. I needed a break, some clarity, or at least a distraction, so I walked into the bar. As soon as I stepped inside, I spotted him sitting at the counter, casually perched on a stool. The sight of him made my blood boil. Bastard. I slid onto the stool beside him, extending my hand as if we were old pals. "George Baker, long time no see," I said, masking my true feelings. He glanced at me with a feigned expression of confusion, pretending not to recognize me. The bastard was as transparent as glass. "This is Bill Johnson," I continued, letting the words hang in the air. "Does my wife work with you? We met at the party last year." Suddenly, the light of recognition dawned in his eyes. "Oh yes, Bill. Good to see you again," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was unpleasantly sticky. "Freak. How are you, Bill?" he asked, as if he didn't already know the answer. I ordered a beer, trying to keep my composure. "Well, you know, same old," I replied nonchalantly. The bartender slid the cold glass toward me, and I took a deep, satisfying sip. It was exactly what I needed after the day's news. George leaned in, a smug smile on his face. "I hear you're a big fan of reading. Your wife is always talking about your latest story," he remarked, as if being literate was some rare talent. I bit back the urge to mock him and instead responded, "Well, I do read a lot, but she was probably talking about the stories I write." His eyebrows raised in mock interest as I took another sip of the amber liquid. "Really? Have you written anything I might have read?" The sarcasm in his voice was almost palpable. 100 snarky responses flooded my mind, but I merely shrugged. "I guess I haven't. I mostly write short stories and publish them online. I get some interesting feedback sometimes. It's like a writing workshop, but other times, it's like fighting a pack of rabid dogs." He laughed, though I had no idea why. Maybe it was his need to feel superior. "So, what do you write about?" "Shakespeare," he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I write about this and that," I replied, trying to keep it casual. "I observe what's going on around me, listen to people, and you'd be surprised how much you can learn just by paying attention." "And then you report your findings?" he said, still laughing. "Not exactly," I corrected him. "I think about what I hear, mull it over in my mind, and try to figure out what makes people tick, why they do the things they do. Writing becomes a way of expressing those thoughts." "I'd rather watch football," he said dismissively. I wasn't surprised. I bet he's never played football in his life, I thought. But I stayed silent as he continued. "So how do you write these little stories of yours?" Indulgence seems to be his forte. "If you think about the characters in the story, they start to take on a life of their own," I explained. "You start them off, and they sort of steer the story in their own direction. For me, it's a form of meditation that helps me understand people who usually elude me. Maybe you just need to take more walks. The real world is more interesting," he said, dismissing my explanation. I turned my gaze to the mirror behind the bar, not ready to look at him directly. "And that's the thing," I said, "when you write, you can live out things on the page that you can't do in the real world." "Like what?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. I took another sip of my beer, gathering my thoughts. "For example, if you catch your wife with some lousy coward, you can punch him in the face, break his nose, hear the satisfying crack when it happens, and watch the blood spray as he falls. Then you divorce her and leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But you can't do that in real life. You'll still get arrested, despite your motives." "Well, in most states. Here in Texas, they'd probably congratulate you for your restraint. And the wife? She'd get nothing." Half the arrogant jerk laughed, clearly thinking the joke was directed at me. It was time to end this. Writing can indeed be an excellent escape from reality. You can craft almost any outcome on the page, often with a satisfying resolution. That was his final warning. I finished my beer and threw the cash on the counter. Slamming both hands on the bar, I announced to no one in particular, "That was great." I turned toward the door, hesitated, then spun around and delivered a powerful punch. I channeled all my anger and pain into that blow, using every ounce of strength I had. The impact was immediate. A satisfying crack echoed as his nose broke, and blood splattered as he toppled off his stool. I stood over him, watching him try to shield himself from the impending beating before turning and walking out. I had made my point but wasn't willing to face jail over some coward harassing married women. When I got home, late for dinner, my wife was waiting, upset. "You're late. Dinner's cold. Where have you been? Why didn't you call?" She continued her tirade, but I ignored her and went upstairs to change. My hand needed ice, and my face needed a cold compress. As I was changing, the phone rang, and I overheard a muffled conversation I couldn't quite make out. Feeling refreshed, I came back downstairs to find my wife looking disoriented and terrified. Tears were in her eyes as she apologized. "I'm so sorry. It wasn't what you think. I never slept with him. We only danced and fooled around a bit." Her voice trembled. "How would you feel if I only fooled around with Jenny Smith?" Jenny was known for her striking figure, and I knew my wife was jealous of the attention Jenny received from men. All my wife could do was hang her head and whimper. I asked her to define fooling around. They say confession is good for the soul, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook. Her confession matched what I had been told, so I was inclined to believe her. What did that relationship lead to? I pressed. I swear it was everything I felt guilty about. It never went any further than that, I swear, she said, gulping for air. You know I'm unhappy, don't you? This is going to stay with us for a long time. She nodded. I could have told you that. I have friends in this town. If your story hadn't matched what they told me, you'd be on the streets right now. You know that, don't you? Yes, I'm sorry, she said in a panic. I let him get to me, but he didn't get far, I swear. I thought to myself, you let him get a lot further than you should have. But that was a discussion for another time. People are complicated, another feature of real life versus stories. Characters in stories might be simple, but real people are complex. Even the best of them have insecurities and doubts. The important question is whether they learn from their mistakes or will repeat them. Understanding why is difficult, but necessary. I told her, okay, let's heat up dinner. We have some serious conversations ahead. She nodded vigorously, yes, dear. I know. I'm so sorry. I could see the anxiety in her eyes. James, are we going to sleep together tonight? Yes, Maggie, but we have a lot of work to do before I feel like celebrating. You know that, don't you? She wrapped her arms around me, kissing me passionately and wiping the tears from my cheek. Yes, darling. I love you. I really do. I love you. I don't know how he got to me, but it will never happen again. I love you too, but my trust in you has taken a big hit. You know that, don't you? She nodded, tears still in her eyes. I took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to speak further. Now, let's heat up the rest of the food and salvage the evening.